First of all, here with Amy Trask at beautiful Hotel Marina Del Mar. Is it Del Mar?
Del Rey.
Del Rey. Beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for coming down.
First of all, I'm honored to get to meet with you. You are such a consequential figure, not only in the history of the Raiders, but the National Football League. And then to be a woman makes it even more special. I think sometimes we get the impression, well, this is a woman, so it's special. No, it's not. But when it's a woman who does it as the best, then it makes it even more special. I hope that makes, the hot fudge doesn't make the sundae, but good hot fudge makes it pretty good. And does that make sense?
Well, first of all, an ice cream analogy is always going to work well with me. And thank you. That's very, very, very generous of you. But I love the fact that you brought an ice cream analogy with it.
I want to go back because you had a relationship with Al unlike any other. I've heard it described as that you were his Padawan learner. He was Darth Vader and you were Luke Skywalker. I know that they weren't exactly teammates, but the analogy that one person said to me, they were closer than any father and daughter that they'd ever known. Yet you were one of them that would stand up to him, and not because you were belligerent, because you loved him. And I think that was the word, Amy, that stunned me. The more people I talked to who knew you and knew Al, was the word love. That was the one word everybody used. He loved you, you loved him. So tell me, I know you've done a lot of interviews, but tell me what built that. Because that doesn't come overnight. What built it?
Well, I think it goes back to the very, very, very start of my career. I'd been there 2.5 weeks. And of course, I'd heard all of the urban legend, if you will, don't disagree with Al. Al won't tolerate anyone who disagrees with him. Al doesn't tolerate disagreement. And 2.5 weeks into my job, he walks into an office where I'm sitting with a coworker, and he rips into this man like I had never seen someone rip into someone before. Rips into him like I would imagine a velociraptor ripping into flesh. And after a bit of time, I realized Al was wrong. So I said loudly, "Excuse me, you're wrong." And he turned his head, and I will never for my whole life ever forget the expression on his face. And he said, "Excuse me?" And I went on to explain to him that he was wrong, that if he was basing his conclusion on inaccurate data. And I said, look, if the data on which you were basing your conclusion was accurate, if the information you were using to reach this decision or this conclusion was accurate, it's a fair conclusion. But you're basing your entire conclusion on inaccurate information and inaccurate data. And he yelled, and I yelled, and he yelled. And it wasn't yelling in the sense of personal vindictiveness or a personal attack. We were both very passionate about our points. Neither of us had soft voices when we were speaking passionately about something. And after we went back and forth for quite a while, he looked at me and he said, "Oh, okay, I gotcha. I got it." And I realized at that moment, and then we went on to have a great conversation about how to address the problem that he had been so angry about. And what I realized at that moment was these legends, if you will, these stories about Al not tolerating disagreement or anyone who would disagree with him were untrue. Because if that were the case, I'd have been fired 2 or 2.5 weeks into my job. I mean, people gathered outside the office while we were arguing. We were so loud. And one woman brought boxes because she figured, all right, this girl's been here 2.5 weeks. She's gone. But we went on to have a relationship for almost 30 years in which we disagreed with one another more than we agreed. But it was healthy disagreement. It was productive disagreement. I disagreed with him when I thought he was wrong. I disagreed with him when I thought there were better answers. But what I understood, Honda, was at the end of the day, he was the controlling owner of that team. And it was my responsibility to try to change his mind when I thought he was making a bad decision, when I thought he was wrong. But if I couldn't change his mind, it was my responsibility to effectuate his decision in the best manner I could and make out of a decision with which I disagreed the best of that decision. And one thing for which I had zero tolerance were people who would not disagree with him directly, but then run around and engage in whisper campaigns. Oh, I don't like this decision. This isn't my decision. This isn't my decision. I don't like this decision. This is Al's decision. Oh, no, no, no. Once the decision is made, it is the decision of the organization, and it is everybody's responsibility to effectuate that decision as best we could. And I just didn't have any tolerance for people who engaged in what I'll call as whisper campaigns, trying to distance themselves from it. That's not what a teammate does.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And which is perfect for an organization that's built around a team playing a sport.
Well, and I'll digress for 1 minute and tell you one of the things that has always been flabbergasting to me about every team, and this is every sport. People that work for a team will look at their players, in the case of football, on the field, but it could be on the court, on the pitch, on a diamond, and they'll look and they'll be very disdainful. Oh, that guard saw that the tackle was having trouble and didn't slip over and help him. Or, wow, that safety should have gone and helped that corner. And they would be very, very derisive about, you're not a good teammate if you're that guard and you don't slip over and help the tackle. Or you're that safety and you don't run over to help that corner. And yet, they didn't do that in front office. So if you're in the ticket office and you finish your responsibilities, but you see that the people in the community relations office or the customer service office or the marketing and sponsorship office are buried and unable to get done what they need to, go over and help them. The same way you would expect that guard to help the tackle, the same way you would expect that safety to help the corner. I just am flabbergasted when people don't hold themselves to the same standard when they're in the business operations of a team that they hold players to.
I heard it said once, don't be the person that wants everyone to judge your heart while you judge everyone else's actions.
Wow, I've never heard that.
Isn't that powerful?
That really is. All
right, I want to dig in. When you hear people say that they saw it as it was a love in a appropriate manner. I don't mean that romantic, but they felt like you loved and adored him. He loved and adored you. Again, I mean this totally in an acceptable. I told you, one person said it was almost like a father-daughter.
Well, and please know that I absolutely accept what you're saying in the most appropriate manner, and I love that you clarified that it's in the most appropriate manner. And I will just add that as much as we did love one another, there were times we wanted to strangle one another. There were times, I can't tell you the number of times he hung up the phone on me. I would get these midnight calls and we would have arguments and he would hang up the phone or I would hang up the phone. We argued a lot, but we both had the view that that could be productive and healthy, and it didn't impact our relationship.
And it made the Raiders better. You can't run an effective organization with yes people.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That is a talking point of mine, a mantra of mine. You want an organization in which people feel not only okay, but empowered and encouraged to share different views, to argue, to tell someone when you think that's a bad decision. That's how you get disagreement. Can be very, very, very helpful, and it's important.
You are 5 foot, 100-pound, tiny little human being.
Excuse me. I'm 5'2.5".
Okay.
Let's just not lose
But you're
that
a 5'2.5", 100-pound, tiny human being in a sport that's known for behemoths, and yet you were one of the most powerful people in that franchise. For you, I was told once that by someone who was part of the Raiders when you were there, that they always respected, they didn't think you ever took one day for granted.
I never did.
Can you talk about that side of you?
When I joined the Raiders initially, it was as an intern. And when I got there, I would do anything and everything I could to help. And when I joined full-time, a year and a half or so, 2 years, whatever, later, that was my view as well. I would have done it. How do I say this? I wanted to be part of the Raiders. It wasn't important to me what I was hired to do. It was important to me that I was hired to be part of that organization. And if my job was solely to stand behind the bench on the sideline and pick up the scrunched up Gatorade cups, well, then you know what? I would have been the best scrunched up Gatorade cup picker-upper there was. When I started my job, I had primary responsibilities. But when I got done doing what I needed to do, or what I was told to do, or what my primary responsibilities were to do, I would walk around and say, how can I help you? I went in the ticket office. So here I am. I'm out of grad school. I have a law degree. I'd go in the ticket office and I would alphabetize the will call envelopes because they were busy in the ticket office. We had a home game. Someone needed to alphabetize the ticket envelopes. I would go into the scouting office and help them get the files ready for the combine. I would go into the community relations department and help them shove put stuff in the gift bags. I wanted to do anything I could to contribute. It didn't matter to me what the responsibilities were. I just wanted to help. And very, very, very early in my career, someone said to me, you better stop what you're doing. And I said, excuse me? And she said, you better stop what you're doing. We all see you walking into every single department and, alphabetizing in the ticket office and filing things in the scouting department and doing gift bags in the community relations department. Al is not going to like that. He is not going to tolerate that. You better stop that or you're going to be gone. Well, I didn't stop it. And then one day, again, very early in my career, I'm walking, and we're down in El Segundo at the time. I'm walking up our main staircase, and Al is walking down, and we stop right at the same place. And he looks at me and says, where are we on ticket sales for Sunday? And two things happened. One, I knew at that moment he knew exactly what I was doing. He knew that I was learning about every single department. And number two, I told him the answer. And I knew that he knew what I was doing. Asking me that question was his way of encouraging me to keep doing it. And I knew the answer to his question. And I thought to myself at that moment, all right, he just empowered you, encouraged you to continue to learn about every department in this organization. But you better know the answer. Because when he stops you on the staircase or elsewhere and he asks you, where are we on ticket sales? Or how are we in terms of getting people ready to go to the combine? Or what's going on with that event? You better know the answer.
Wow, that's powerful. So I want to go back to you. You had a moment where you're meeting with a potential sponsor of the team. And it was a moment that a lot of people probably would have been taken aback, but to you it was one of your greatest moments.
One of the most special moments in my career.
It was a moment where you weren't Amy Trask, woman executive. You were Amy Trask, Raider. Can you tell us that moment?
It was, almost 30 years of special moments, and this is one that does stand out. We brought a business in. It was a business I wanted the Raiders to do business with in a sort of a broader than a sponsorship, a business partnership. Uh-huh. And so we brought in the senior executives from this business, and I asked Al to come in and at a minimum meet and greet them, and I would tease him. I'm like, and be nice, and or stay the whole meeting, but at a minimum, please come in and talk to them a bit. He's like, he said, sure. And he came to the meeting and he stayed there the whole time. Well, he walks into the meeting room and he starts immediately going to the people from the other business. And I'm in there with a few Raider staff that were going to be participating in the meeting. And one of the executives with the business with which we were meeting is a woman. Well, he walks up to her and he says, nice to meet you. I'm Al Davis. What's your name? And then excuse me one sec. There's like a mosquito on. Okay, it's gone. I didn't want it to bite you. He says, nice to meet you. And he says, I try very hard, I try not to, I don't think he said very hard. He said, I try not to swear in front of women. Well, I start looking at my three or four coworkers in the room, and I'm looking at them like, did he just say what I think he said? And then he goes on and says, and even if I do on occasion swear in front of a woman, I will never swear at a woman. Well, now I'm looking at my coworkers like, did you just hear that? Because he swore at me all the time. Well, I was so taken aback by what he said. I'm looking at my coworkers and I flip my arm and my pen comes out and it thumps on the table. And he hears the pen thump and he looks over at me and looks back at the woman and says, oh, I swear at Amy. I just don't consider her a woman. And that was the best compliment he ever could have given me.
Because it wasn't a degrading comment.
Oh, of course, and
it was a compliment. You're one of us.
It was a magnificent compliment. He was stating that I don't think of her as a woman. I think of her. I don't. I don't usually have this hard a time finding words, but it was such a special moment. It was so meaningful, and just the way he said it was, "Oh, Amy, I swear at Amy, but I don't consider her a woman." And there were some people who thought I should be offended by that, and I said, "Are you crazy? Offended? That was the best compliment he could have given me."
Yeah. Matt Millen is a dear friend of mine. I love him like my own brother. I always tell him any day that I wake up and he's still alive is a great day in my life.
Oh, wow.
Because of what he went through with his heart.
Yeah.
Years ago, we were on the set of my TV show. I was a beat reporter that covered the Lions. And in between commercial breaks, because we were talking about the Raiders, he said to me that every other NFL team, the fans think they're part of the team. But only with the Raiders do the players think the fans are part of the team. When Matt said that to me, I thought that was so powerful. And then learning about you got it. You were the one that used the bathrooms, went out in the stands, went to the tailgates. Talk about your relationship with Raider Nation, because you love them.
I do. And I'll tell you two separate issues. Number one, I understood from the moment I joined the team the importance of the fans. Fans aren't just to be thanked. Fans aren't simply to be appreciated with a gift bag. You know how here's a hat, here's a tote bag. Fans are not to be thanked or appreciated. Fans are to be cherished. And yes, you thank fans, and yes, you appreciate fans, but you need to cherish your fans. Because without fans, there's no NFL. There's no league as we know it without fans. And I got that from the minute I started my career. And every single game, every home game, and every road game I attended, I started by walking through the parking lots. Now, when it was a home game, it was mostly Raider fans. But wherever we went on the road, there were Raider fans in the parking lot. And as a little bit of a footnote and aside, when fans learn, because, wherever I would walk, Amy, come to our tailgate. Amy, come to our tailgate. Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I wasn't going to dive into what they were barbecuing. Well, when that word got out in the parking lot, I would walk through the parking lot before the game, and I would hear, Amy, we grilled you asparagus. Amy, we've got you broccoli. It was the asparagus one I can just hear in my ear. And I'd walk the parking lots before the game. And then during the game, I had responsibilities. I would handle those responsibilities, and I always made time to go into the stands. And I'm not just talking club seats or fancy schmancy seats. I would go to the third deck and sit with fans. I would go to the end zone and sit with fans. If you're not enjoying fans, if you're not cherishing your moments with fans, what are you doing? I mean, I remember a game we lost in Oakland at the very, very, very end. We were playing the Chiefs, and at the very end, they found Andre Rison in the back of the end zone, and it was one of the most heart-crushing losses. Well, I was in the stands with the fans for that end of the game, and I remember, we're leading, and the fans are cheering, and I'm like, wait a minute, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. Stop, it's not over yet. And then we lost the game, and every fan turned and like, are you going to be okay, Amy? Well, I went home that night. Long story about what happened with some mishaps born of how totally devastated I was by that loss. Phone rings late at night, it's Al. He's calling me to see if I'm okay. He's like, I just want to make sure you're okay. And I'm thinking, Al Davis is calling me to see if I'm too heartbroken over the loss. But I did. I went in the third deck. And the thing I encouraged staff to do, I said, you need to be out in the stands as well. When you need to use the restroom, you need to go line up and try the restroom in the end zone. You need to go to the third deck. You need to understand what the fans are experiencing. You okay? Mm-hmm. And then, if it's okay with you, I would talk to the work I did to change the reputation of the fans.
Oh, absolutely.
As you know, there was a point in time where the reputation of Raider fans was really, really rough.
Yeah.
And people said, you can't go to a Raider game if you're wearing visiting team jerseys or visiting team colors. You can't bring your kids to a Raider game. Well, I knew that just as is the case with all 32 teams, the vast, vast, vast majority of fans are phenomenal people.
Great people.
And there was like one little teeny weeny handful that didn't behave appropriately, and that is the case for all 32 teams. We just saw it in New England this season. We've seen it elsewhere. I knew it was a little teeny handful. And when I set out on my quest to change the reputation to the correct reputation of Raider fans, you know who my biggest allies were?
Who?
Raider fans.
That's
Amy,
awesome.
we see what you're doing. We want to help you. And what I said to Raider fans, I had meetings. I brought in hundreds and hundreds of season ticket holders multiple nights a week, and we had, call it a town hall or a discussion about how do we fix this, how do we correct this, I want your input. The fans gave phenomenal input, and what I said to them is, I love that you're bejeweled and bespectacled and bespangled and costumed, but I also love that you're good people and you know the right thing and the wrong thing, and what we had to do was change the behavior of that small group of people who didn't behave appropriately. And you know what? We did, and the reason I was able to accomplish that is because the fans helped me.
Agreed.
They wanted it as well.
Wayne Mabry, the violator.
Oh, I love him.
Yeah.
I have to tell you I have to tell you a story about him.
Okay.
Well, go ahead, and I'll tell you later.
So he's a great friend of mine, and I shared this with him the other day, and I'll share it with you. Coming here, I had an impression of what Raider fan was like. And after 4 years, I'm constantly thanking them in my articles, in my podcast.
They're phenomenal.
Yeah, because I think that, and I've taken criticism from media for doing that, but I constantly thank the fans because I say this all the time. Everybody at Allegiant Stadium on Sunday is getting paid to be there but the fan, the most important person.
And they're the ones who are paying to be there.
And they're the ones paying the rest of us. They are the most important person. They're more important than any player. They're more important than any owner, any media. I get it. All right.
And I'll just say the way I can say it the best is, without fans, there is no league as we know it. Gorilla Rilla, you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you mentioned the Violator.
Love Gorilla Rilla.
We love Gorilla Rilla. Stoner Dude. I mean, all of them. And the reason I smiled so much is a lot of these guys flew up from L.A., and my mom and dad, from the moment I joined the Raiders, and they weren't big football people at all. They'd like watch the Super Bowl, maybe. But from the moment I joined the Raiders, they bought season tickets, and they came to every game in L.A., and even when the team moved, they bought season tickets, and they flew up to every game. And these fans, a lot of them would be on the plane with my mom and dad. And I remember, and I think it was Violator who said to my dad, "Hey, Pop, let me get some silver and black on your face. Let me paint ya," when they were flying up to Oakland. And my mom's like, no, Amy won't like that. And I'm like, are you kidding me, Mom? If my dad came off the plane looking like Violator, how much better does life get?
Oh, that's awesome. So I want to talk about the Raiders didn't want to leave California. That was not the desire of their heart, but it was unable to get a stadium, and I know it broke your heart. I know it broke a lot of people's heart. But how proud were you that, because you love the Raiders, you have so much respect for Mark, and that they were able to finally get the world-class stadium the Raiders deserve?
I'm going to answer that in two respects, and they're not mutually exclusive. My heart was with them staying in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the team was going to leave years before the team left. Al wanted to keep the team in Oakland, but he shared with me in a very special conversation that he was going to leave the decision as to the team's location up to Mark. And I had the sense from that point on, from my interactions with others, that the team was going to move. So I am heartbroken for the fans in Oakland who are heartbroken. The other side of that equation, and these are not mutually inconsistent, is the stadium is magnificent. They absolutely accomplished, Mark absolutely accomplished that which had not been accomplished before, which was a magnificent, magnificent stadium for the Raiders. So for the fans whose hearts are broken, my heart is with them. And for the fans who love traveling to Allegiant Stadium and love being in the new building, in the new location, I'm thrilled for them. And it is a magnificent building. And CBS, we have the Super Bowl this year.
Right.
So I'm going to be there.
I'll be there too.
Good.
And,
we'll have ice cream.
You and your ice.
I know. Okay.
No, I'll have some whipped cream because there's no carbs in that.
You're absolutely right, and especially when you get the sugar-free, carb-free, like the oat cream. Yeah. Well, I got you.
Okay.
I got you.
So let's talk about that, because the moving of the stadium cured what had been decades of financial struggle. The Raiders were never one of the wealthy teams. They were in a smaller market.
That's putting that very diplomatically.
I'm trying to be
that was very diplomatic.
Okay, they were not one of the wealthy teams. They didn't have one of the best stadiums or stadium deals. That's not a slam on Oakland. It's just the reality. And for years, it's not the case anymore because of what Mark's done with
Correct.
Allegiant. They're very able, cash-wise, to do whatever they want. But those financial woes paid a price on Al. Will you talk about that, please?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, to make sure I'm absolutely clear, Allegiant is magnificent, and you're absolutely right. It solved the financial issues.
Yep.
When Al was looking to the Raiders' future, I was not with the Raiders when the team was in Oakland. I joined the Raiders after Al had moved it to Los Angeles. I was with the team when he chose to move it back to Oakland, and I looked at all the available deals with him. We looked at something in Sacramento, we looked at something at Hollywood Park, we looked at something in Irwindale, and we looked at something in Oakland. And I explained to him that the financial arrangement in the Oakland deal was the worst financial arrangement for the Raiders. In other words, of all the options we had, looking at it strictly from a finance standpoint, the Oakland deal was the worst. And we had long discussions about that, and he ultimately shared with me that that's where his heart was. He wanted the team to go back to Oakland. But we were the secondary tenant. The A's controlled the vast number of revenue streams. And it was a deal that was hard on us. It was not a good economic deal. Al made decisions without regard to financial ramifications. There were team owners that it just drove them nuts. There used to be revenue sharing within the league, and I would have discussions with owners. And I had a discussion with Al, and I'm sorry to jump back and forth, but let me go back and say, not only was the stadium deal we did with Oakland not a good financial deal for the team, and I went through all of that with Al, and I showed him the revenue streams, and I showed him the revenue projections, and I showed him the comparisons as between stadiums. He went with his heart. But as a result, we were, to use a sort of hackneyed phrase, behind the eight ball economically. But he had the same view with respect to sponsorships. If it was a sponsorship that wanted more from the organization than he was willing to do, if it was a sponsorship he didn't particularly like, if it was an advertiser who wanted more from us than he was willing to give, he would just nix those. And I got very, very frustrated, and I said to him, look, you don't get it both ways. You don't get to enter deals that are not in the financial best interest of the organization, and you don't get to nix deals that are good for us financially and then complain about our finances. And I had that discussion with him umpteen times. I said, fair enough, you don't want to do this deal, we won't do the deal, but then I don't want to hear from you when we're out of money, because you can't have it both ways. It's intellectually dishonest, was what I explained to him, to both want to nix deals and yet complain that we didn't have financial resources. And I said to him, and I had this discussion with owners of other teams, you can't nix deals because you don't like the branding or the terms of the deal or what's required of the team, and yet expect other teams that are doing those deals to then revenue share with you. You're expecting them to do deals you won't do, but then you want a share of that? I mean, we argued about that all the time.
Well, that's awesome. Now, there was a time where that had finally gotten to him.
Well, let me back up a minute.
Okay.
We were always in an, oh my God, we need money. I mean, we were always, maybe I was the one who was panicking. He never was, and I'll tell you a story about that. We didn't have operational cash. We did not have the cash we needed to operate. Now, some of it was we didn't have as much cash as other teams. Some of it was simply cash flow.
Right.
And I would negotiate a line of credit so that we had the appropriate cash flow. But that was every year. That didn't just happen once. That was every single year. I was out scraping for credit facilities, working capital, working lines of credit. And I remember at one point, it got to a point where the financial crisis was existential in nature. And I was working to get us another credit facility. And at one point I said to him, because it was so stressful and we didn't have it done yet, and I was working to get the deal done, and at one point, is that okay with you? Okay. At one point, late at night, I said to him, I don't understand how you can sleep at night. And his quote to me was, I can sleep at night because I know you aren't sleeping at night.
What a compliment. I can sleep at night because you're not.
Right. And this was not a one-time instance. Every single year, multiple times, we would do a 1-year credit facility. Okay, we can live another year. We would do a 1-year credit facility. Nobody knew any of this because I did this all with our finance department behind the scenes. Nobody in PR or marketing or sponsorships or social media, once there was such a thing as social media, nobody knew about this. But every single year I was scraping for credit. And that comment from him, again, was one of probably the biggest compliment he ever gave me. I can sleep at night because I know you're not sleeping at night, because I always found a way to get it done. And to your question, at one point, a couple years before he passed away, he just got tired of it. And he said to me, let's just sell the whole team. Let's just sell the controlling interest. Let's just sell it. Let's be done with it. This is hard on you. You're always having to find us money. You're just going through these lengths to find, let's just sell the whole thing. And I looked at him and I said, no. You want to leave this team to your wife and your son. You want your son to have this team. I will find you the money. And I went and found the money.
What a gift to Mark.
I don't think he ever knew that his dad had gotten to the point where he just said, Amy, sell the team.
And yet you fought for it for him.
I fought for it so he could pass it on to Mark. And of course to Carol, but of course Carol was of the same generation as Al, so ultimately Mark.
Yeah. How powerful. There have been multiple times in the Raiders' history. That is one where you stepped in moments that the public doesn't know about and saved the Raiders or had a humongous impact. Can you tell us some of those stories, please?
Well, one of the things that I feel the best about, I guess if you were to say, there were the financial ones we talked about. Changing the perception of the fans is something that was extremely, extremely important. Because if we, and when I say we, I mean me, with the help of the good fans, if we hadn't changed the perception of the fans, attendance would have dropped. It would have been disastrous. And I was getting calls from executives at the league office, Aim, we can't keep doing this. You got to find a way to fix this, and I did. But the other thing, well, let me think. The other thing that I feel very, very, very good about is I convinced Al to let me settle all of the litigation in which the organization was involved. There were lawsuits with the NFL. And I'm always the little 8-year-old who, when people ask me about the litigation with the NFL, I always say, they started it.
Right.
And I do know I sound like I'm 8.
Mm-hmm. But it's true.
But it's true. Al just knew how to counterclaim with a vengeance. But we had all the litigation with the NFL. The city and county, City of Oakland, County of Alameda sued us. So here we were, constantly embroiled in litigation. And I don't believe litigating is the way to conduct a business. I don't believe litigation is smart. I don't believe litigation is healthy.
And you're an attorney.
And I have a law degree, but I was the kid who went to law school saying I'm never, ever, 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 ever setting foot in a courtroom. That was not. I wanted a law degree to help me with business. I also wanted a law degree because when I came out of college, which was 1982, I thought that having an extra degree would give me a little bit more gravitas. I knew I was going to be the only woman in a lot of rooms, and I thought that law degree might give me a little bit of extra gravitas. But I also wanted the education, not to practice law, but for business. Well, after I'd been with the Raiders a few years, this is no way to run a business, Al. All of this effort and energy and time, forget the money that we're spending on lawyers. This is how much effort and time and energy you are putting into depositions and hearings. This is just not the way to run a business. And by the way, you're one of the clubs of the NFL. We need to work within the NFL. It took me decades, but I convinced him to let me settle every single piece of litigation. And I will always remember that when I walked into his office with the final settlement documents for him to sign, and I laid them down next to each other and handed him a pen, he picked up the pen and he looked at me and said, "I'm doing this for you, kid." And it just hit my heart. Just hit my heart.
That's powerful. This is a question now about the present, but it's going to take us back to the past. I think that Antonio Pierce and Champ Kelly don't deserve the jobs. I believe they've earned them. Champ Kelly is a lot like Ron Wolf. He's a guy that's just shrewd evaluator, just universally respected around the NFL, which Ron was. He's a guy that he doesn't have to have his ego stroked, which you know to be a GM. You've got every owner loves to be loved. Every coach loves to. If you're not getting love, you're worried about your locker room standing with you. So to be a GM in the NFL, you almost have to be egoless, which is very hard to be in that job. Very, very difficult. He's that guy. You look at Antonio Pierce. The similarities to John Madden. Football player, successful, position coach, linebacker like John Madden. Maybe not enough experience on certain issues, but a head coach's job is to get coordinators and coaches who are good at that. He's the CEO. And he's a lot like Art Shell, who was a position coach, elevated to interim. That was named the head coach. And these two men have captivated this team. I was in the locker room yesterday and talking to the players about them. I'm curious. You're no longer with the organization, but you're a Raider. You love them. I mean, every time I see you, you got black somewhere on.
Okay, but it's also a little Audrey Hepburn, right?
Yeah, it is. But
okay.
But the black ball cap gives it away. But what do you think of what they've done, and what do you think of them as Raiders? Because I made the comment, Amy, there is no bigger Raider move than to say to the NFL, screw your Rooney Rule. It should be the Al Davis rule. And by the way, there's a Rooney Rule because other teams weren't like us. We didn't need it. We're willing to, if you really think you're going to punish us with draft picks, go ahead and try. We're hiring 2 minorities, but these are the guys. Why string them along? Hire them. I've had GMs tell me they could do it. I know. NFL says they can't. But people like Rick Goslin, my mentor, who you respect, one of the greatest NFL writers of all time, said do it. No way the NFL is going to punish him. I'm just curious about what you think as a fan of what they've done.
Couple answers to your question. Number one, it is clear that team is, pardon the use of the expression, but that team is bawling out for them. They are, and I'll say Antonio in particular, but really both of them.
Yep.
This team is playing with a passion and I don't even know the word I want, a passion and oomph.
Like Raiders.
Yeah, right. But the thing that grabbed me when you said they deserve the job, they've earned, not that they've not deserved, but they've earned the job. Antonio Pierce said something almost precisely that when he was asked a question after one of the games about, do you think you're going to have an opportunity to this job? What are you going to do? And he said, my resume is on the field.
Yep.
And when that gave me goosebumps, because when you watch the passion and the commitment and the steel-mindedness of the players when they are playing, that's what you want from a coach. That's what you want from a coach. And to your Rooney Rule point, and just don't use the part where I said balls out, because that's like kind of rude. We'll stick with passion and commitment and strength. I'll use what you want. But as to the Rooney Rule, I was on all the conference calls with the league when they were having they'd have conference calls where one person or two people could be on the call to discuss the implementation of the Rooney Rule, and Al didn't want to be on the calls. He told me, just handle it. And after one of those calls, I went into his office and I said, it really should be called the Al Davis Rule. And he looked at me and said, I don't want a rule named after me. And we had a discussion, and his point was, and he's right, he didn't need a rule to hire Tom Flores. He didn't need a rule to later hire me. He didn't need a rule to hire Art Shell. He hired the people he believed were right for the job without regard to race or gender or ethnicity or any other individuality, which has no bearing on whether one can do a job. And there were times, multiple times, I said to Al, you should get more credit. Hell, you should get any credit for doing what you've done in terms of Tom and then me and then Art. And he would stop me each time abruptly and say, I don't want any credit. I didn't do it for credit. And that's what made it even more spectacular. He did it for the right reason.
Yeah, that's
He
pretty
didn't want credit.
So I'm going to ask you. I met him a few times, but not a friend. I'm not implying that he was. You knew him and loved him. I took some criticism for saying if these were Al's guys, he wouldn't have waited on the Rooney Rule. He just would have hired them. Do you agree with me?
Is your question, if he had already decided
Yes.
that they were the right men for the job, would he just hire him? Yeah, he might well do that.
Yeah. I want to go back and tell you why I asked that. Now, I first reported this story a couple weeks ago. It had never gone public before. Matt Millen is the general manager of the of the Lions.
I knew what you meant.
And Marty Morningwig is his coach. The owner had wanted to go with a West Coast offense. Bill Walsh had talked to him about how good it was. They wanted Marty Morningwig, so Matt went and got him. Someone in the organization, and because Matt has asked me not to identify them, but it's somebody above Matt, there's only a couple people above Matt, goes and hires Steve Mariucci. They go down, they get a hold of Matt, who's at either the blue-gray or the Senior Bowl. I don't remember which one, but he's at one of them. And says, I just hired Steve Mariucci, deal with it. And so, now, I'm close friends with Matt, so I know all this as this is going on. Didn't report it, and Matt was very frustrated because according to the Rooney Rule, he had to interview X amount of people, including minorities, before somebody could be hired. And as you know, Matt's Christian faith is the center of who he is as a man. And I saw him one day, and I just said to him, are you okay? He goes, no. I'm like, because I knew what was going on. I said, okay, why are you not okay? He said, because as a Christian, I'm not going to lie and disrespect an African American and tell him you got a shot at this job when I know that we've already hired the guy. I won't do it. He goes, and on top of my Christian faith, I cut my teeth in the NFL as a Raider. Al Davis would never do this. You could accuse him of a lot. He wasn't a liar. And he goes, I'm not going to betray my Christian faith, and I'm not going to betray that I'm a Raider. I'll never forget he said it because I'm a Raider. Here he is, the general manager of the Lions. It was so precious. And so he goes, and he would call people and say, and I could name them, but I don't want to, I need to interview you for this job. Okay, great. Well, it's not great. You're not getting it.
It's perfunctory.
And I want you to know I hold you in too much respect, and I hold my faith in my being a Raider in too much respect to lie to you. And Matt had so much respect among many of those coaches, they would say, Matt, if you can't find anyone else, I'll do it for you. But if you can, I really don't want to do it if I don't have a shot. So Matt ends up going before Paul Tagliabue.
I remember this.
Gets fined $200,000 because he wouldn't lie. And so, knowing Matt and knowing how much Al meant to him, I said right after the Chiefs game, these guys have earned it. Al wouldn't wait. Al would say, screw your rule. I've never needed it.
Well, that's the point.
And he would have said, you go ahead, try to take my draft picks. There's no way that you're going to be able to get away with it. The public would go crazy. And it doesn't matter. Why would I go interview other people if I know these are my guys?
Yeah, Al, I cannot think of any instance in almost 30 years where he didn't tell the truth, to your point. And sometimes to his detriment. I mean, I remember sitting in depositions where I'm like, you know, just answer the question yes or no. You know, just answer the questions yes or no. And I'm just listening to him, but he told the truth. And I would say to him afterwards, you know, you just killed us. Yeah, but it was the truth. And he was willing to live with the consequences of doing what he thought was right and telling the truth.
So let's get into...
By the way, when you say, the reason I was smiling so broadly when you said that, you know, Matt said, I'm a Raider, early in my career. I mean, I had just joined the organization, and some of our partners were down and wanted to go out to practice, and practice was almost over. So this is in El Segundo, and I'm standing on the sideline of practice with some of our business partners, some of our team partners, and the media had just been let in because it's the very tail end of practice, and they're standing a little bit to my left, and Gene Upshaw's to my right, but we're sort of, it's a distance. Well, one of the people in the media yells out, and so clearly in a voice designed for everyone to hear it, hey, Gene, what's it like having a girl work for the Raiders? Or what's it like having a girl work for the team? And everybody goes silent, and I'm just standing there not saying a word. And Gene, who was a mountain of a man, in his booming voice, simply says, she's not a girl, she's a Raider. And I still get goosebumps to this day. I can hear it in his voice.
I can see it in your face what it means to you.
I mean, my heart almost exploded to have Gene Upshaw say to this guy who had this need to say, what's it like having a girl work for the team? She's not a girl, she's a Raider. And I mean, I thought like I was going to pop. I just thought, and I remember when Gene passed away, Roger Goodell called me. And so it's late at night, California time. So it's really late New York time. It's like 9, 10 o'clock California time. And I look down at the phone and it says Roger Goodell. And I said to my husband, oh, now what did we do? Oh my God, now what did we do? And I answer the phone and it's Roger. And he told me that Gene had just passed away, that he had just that day passed or that evening passed away. And it was an amazing conversation. And the reason Roger called me is he wanted me to call Al and tell Al. And I then picked up the phone and I called Al and I told him Gene had passed away. And I just remember Al cried and I cried. Al talked about Gene for the longest time and he did, he cried.
Powerful moments, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is one thing over your time with the Raiders that you wish people knew about? Is there one thing,
I'm thinking.
Something that, let me tell you where I'm going with this, because I've got somewhere. It is one thing when you say, wow, great, look, a woman got this job. But it's another when, like AP and like Champ Kelly, you earned it. You weren't given this job. You had to fight every step of the way to get it. You're a hero to tens of thousands of little girls.
I can't even process that in my brain.
I know you can't, but it's the reality, so at some point you better.
I guess the thing I would like, and I don't know that I'd like people to know, but this is something that was a challenge. When I joined the organization, there were a number of people there who, as they saw me sort of growing within the organization and Al giving me more responsibility, were very resentful. I remember one person yelling out at me. We're in the lobby in El Segundo, and this is a fairly senior executive, and he yells out, we were fine here before you got here, and we're going to be fine here when we get rid of you. And so there were people within the organization that I had absolutely no authority whatsoever to fire, to change the roles, to change the responsibilities, to relieve them of responsibilities. there were people there that did not want me. Now, by the way, I want to be very clear. Never, ever, ever, ever a player. There was not one time in my career that I sensed from any player on the Raiders or any team any resistance to my gender. Or players want to know, are you going to do something to help us win?
Yeah.
I remember
that's all they care about.
I remember before a game once, our kicker ran up to me and was panicked because we're playing up in Oakland, and it was at a time when it was half baseball, half football, so the field still had the dirt on it. And the official told the kicker, you can't kick from where you want to kick, we're going to have to move the ball. And kickers, you cannot tell them they can't do what they want. And I said, just take a minute. I called the league office, I called the officiating department, I explained everything, and I got the officiating department to give me permission to put the ball where the kicker wanted it. And after the game, which we won by a field goal, he came up to me and handed me a ball and said, you just won this game for us because I got to kick from where I needed to kick. Players only wanted to know that you were going to help. So I never had any resistance from any player. But there were people in the Raider organization who were very, very resistant to me joining and really, really worked to make my life very difficult. And it was a challenge. And there are absolutely things I could have handled better. Look, I started with the Raiders when I was in my early 20s. I was a kid.
And you're only 30.
Yeah, I know, isn't that? I now officially love you, because, right, only 10 years have gone by. So, I can be a bull in a china shop. And so there were times with respect to these people who were throwing obstacles in my way, like the guy yelling, we'll be great when we get rid of you. We were great before you got here. I handled things sometimes like a bull in a china shop that I perhaps could have handled better, but I did what I did. And, I got it. I could not get rid of people. At one point, the Raider Finance Department, this is in El Segundo, was such an utter disaster. And I was trying to clean things up, and when I joined the Raiders, there was here's one thing that I am extremely, this means a lot to me. When I joined the Raiders, there was no system of checks and balances. There were no internal controls. Anyone could dip into funds when they wanted. Again, no checks and balances, no internal controls. And one of the first things I did when I had the sort of ability to do so, I put in checks and balances. I put in internal controls. I required checks to be signed by more than one person. I required expense receipts to be approved by more than one. I put in internal controls and checks and balances. And that's what you have to do for a business. And that was not appreciated by a lot of people.
My father used to say that if everybody served in the military, there would be no racism, because when you're in a foxhole, you don't give a crap if the person next to you is a woman, black, white, pink, or purple.
And, go on, and I have an example I use all the time.
And that's football. I think football, if everybody had to play football, the world would be a better place, because you don't care. When you're a left tackle, all you care about is the right tackle, is the right guard. If I'm a left tackle, is the left guard next to me going to be in the right spot, or is he going to trip?
And if I'm having trouble, is he going to come help me?
Right.
I said that all the time during my years. And the analogy I use, your dad uses military. My favorite movie is, notwithstanding that everybody thinks it's Animal House, and that is a good movie. My favorite movie is Apollo 13. And there's a scene in the movie where the character played by Ed Harris walks into a conference room, and there's a table, and there's, 8, 10, 6, however many NASA personnel around the table. And he dumps onto that table a bucket full of pieces and parts and nuts and bolts, and he says to the people around that table, using only these pieces and parts, because that's all they had on Apollo 13, you need to find a way to get those men back to Earth alive. Do you think anyone on Apollo 13 gave a damn who was sitting around that table?
No.
Do you think anyone on Apollo 13 cared about their race or their...
Go ahead.
Should we tell them that
Just a heads up warning for you, just to be kind. Just didn't want you guys to get all comfortable and then...
But I will say to people, do you think the men on Apollo 13 cared what the race or the gender or the ethnicity or the religion of those people around the table was? They just wanted to get home alive. Yeah. And you know what? I would look around our stadium on game day. And do you want to move over there?
We're good.
Okay. I would look around our stadium on game day, and I would see people of every age and different socioeconomic status and different races and different religions and for those hours they were together, they had a shared passion. And at the end of the game, either we would kick that winning field goal to win, or we'd find a way to hold off the opposing offense, and you would see people embrace, or we'd lose, and you'd see them commiserate. And I would look in the stands, or I would be in the stands, and you'd see the octogenarian from the affluent suburb hugging the 14-year-old, and they just for that moment had that bond. And it was always my hope that they'd leave the stadium, and the next time there was an issue in society that could divide people, they would realize we all have so much in common.
Yeah, I told Wayne Mabry this the other day. The thing that
You have to give him my love.
I promise.
Okay.
But what really has stood out to me is you've got all colors in the black hole, all economic groups, all political groups, all genders, but in that black hole, they're all Raiders. And I'm not a fan. I'm a journalist that covers it, but I have so much respect for it. My son is 17 months old. If he was 3 and said, "Dad, I want to go to a Raider game," and I'm up in the press box, I told Wayne I would let him go with Uncle Wayne.
I brought Roger
with zero fear.
Okay, I brought Roger Goodell down. He sat in Oakland in the black hole for half a game before he came upstairs. I brought Roger, and I'm like, "Hey, you guys, Roger's going to sit with you." They're like, "Come on, Roger, come on." Leslie Visser, you know Leslie Visser. I brought Leslie Visser to the black hole. I'm like, "You guys, my friend, Leslie, show her a good time." These are great. There's a guy. There was a guy in the black hole in Oakland that just looked so frightening. You know what? He was an assistant U.S. attorney.
My mother, now picture this old lady, and I love her dearly. I don't mean that disrespectfully. Okay, she's like, "Honey, are you sure you want to go cover the Raiders? They look mean." She goes, "There's this one guy." She was talking about Wayne.
I love Wayne.
When I said to her, "Mom, Wayne is now a friend of mine. His name is Wayne. You have to understand." I sent her a picture without his makeup. "Oh, he's so handsome." And now,
and same with Gorilla Rilla,
yeah.
and same with I think Gorilla Rilla is a landscape artist.
Yeah.
I mean, these are just great people, and they were, as I said, they were my strongest allies in correcting the misperception about Raider fans. Were there a handful of fans who didn't behave appropriately? Absolutely. Is that the case for 32 teams?
No.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what? They helped me fix it. And to your point of that commonality, notwithstanding those individualities, I always hoped it would carry over outside of the stadium.
Last question. I have said that when you look over Raider history and people know all that you did, there's a Mount Rushmore of Raiders. You're on it. I mean, there wouldn't be a Raiders today owned by the Davis family if it wasn't for you. What does being a Raider mean to Amy Trask?
I was a Raider. I had umpteen colleagues and friends throughout the league who moved from one team to another, whether they were in the scouting or the GM or player personnel role or in the business operations, CFO, CEO. Didn't matter what their role is. I had umpteen colleagues and friends around the league who would wear, the color, maybe the red of the Chiefs one year, but then they'd be wearing the turquoise of the Dolphins, or maybe the green of the Jets, and then they ultimately were wearing the blue of the Lions. Those are just color examples of uniforms, but my point is, people move around in the league. They go from one team to another team to another team. I never wanted to do that. I was a Raider. And when I made the decision to leave the organization, and that was the hardest decision.
And you could have went other places.
Well, that was the hardest decision I ever made in my life. And look, I get how fortunate I am if that was the hardest, I didn't have to decide which child to feed, but it was the hardest decision I've ever made. And I did have opportunities to go somewhere else. But I didn't view being a Raider as fungible. I didn't view my work for the team as, I worked for the Raiders, now I can go work for this team, now I can go work for... I didn't view it as fungible. I was a Raider, and I didn't want to go anywhere else.
Love it. Amy, you are an icon for the NFL.
Sorry, there's like something floating over your head. It's just a feather. I thought it was a bird about to come on you.
You're an icon for the NFL.
Maybe that's Al.
And the Raiders. But you're my friend, and I just love you and adore you, and I thank you for taking time.
I thank you, and you ain't never getting rid of me. You could write something, you could not write something, you could write something horrible, you could write what a pain in the ass she was. Oh, and by the way, that's something Al used to, oh my gosh, I should have shared that with you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and if we're
recording, go.
Good. I was always, again, I gave you an example of some of the disagreements Al and I would have about what I felt was his intellectual dishonesty about saying no to revenue, but then complaining there was no revenue. There were a lot of things we would argue about, and, I was always on having to find the money, and so I would just be urging him, or he might say pestering him, and at one point he says to me on the phone, "You are a PITA." And then, as if he thought clearly I needed that explained to me, so he went on to say, "That's pain in the ass." Like I needed him to explain to me what PITA was. But to your point of the respect and love we had for one another, I had no problem with him telling me why I was a pain in the ass. Because what I said back to him was, yeah, I'm your pain in the ass, and I'm keeping this place running for you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Let me turn this off real quick.
But really, you ain't never getting rid of me. You could write something or not write something. You could write trash. I want to be your friend.
You're my friend, Amy.